All right, here we go. Get ready to have a good time. This is exciting, isn't it?
All right, we're on. Hello, testing.
Welcome aboard the Dreamliner.
It's the only way to fly.
Prepare the water cooler that we may gather around it later and discuss things.
Am I missing something?
Gary.
Here's a young speaker who is really in demand.
Don't let that go to your head, Gary.
But wait, there's
See,
more.
I'm the guy.
He is Gary Meier.
It's time to come together. All I've got to do is start the show. So I want to tell you, yes it is, the Friday, December 4th, 2020 edition of the Gary Meier Show, Cocktail Hour Live.
Cocktails, woo!
Just past 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or if you're watching a replay, anytime at all. Yesterday, we pre-recorded Gary's interview with bass player Will Lee that will play in today's show. Ask me why? Time zones. And slow down, there's something of a shout-out. Gary also celebrated his birthday this week. He enjoyed that it coincided with the return of the McRib. I don't want to spoil the party. He'll now carry that weight. Well, let it be the week that you share the show. And I'm talking about you. Don't let me down. I need you to help. Subscribe to the Garrforce Live YouTube channel. It's free as a bird, and you can see all our live shows and replay any you missed right there. When technology cooperates and we can work it out. We multi-stream to provide the full interactive live Garrforce experience on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter Periscope. I've got a feeling you'll let us know now and then that you're listening by sending in comments during our live shows on all the platforms. And you can also text us at 773-888-2157. Regular charges may apply, and you may receive no reply at all. Wait, before I say goodbye, no matter where you are, it's time for Digital Mimosa. With that, I've reached the end of a beginning. Now, fasten your seatbelts. It's time to go wheels up on the Garrforce Live.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Welcome aboard the Garrforce. Let's do things that we need to do to get airborne. We have to kick the tires. We have to light the fires. And then it is wheels up. There it is. And as I heard from one of the listeners who've already checked in, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, the 4 cycles of a jet engine. That also has to happen for all this to come together. And it comes together because of the premium members who have subscribed to those lengthier shows. I appreciate that. And you got Bettenhausen Automotive in Tinley Park and Orland Park, Illinois, as a fine sponsor, along with my good friend David Hochberg and his team, your mortgage and refi experts. Okay, lots to do on this program today because next Tuesday is the 40th anniversary of the murder of John Lennon. I thought, well, let's talk Lennon and McCartney, and I have tapped 2 of my friends to do that. These are 2 men who have immersed themselves in Lennon McCartney music. I'll be talking to Will Lee and Jay Goepner on today's program. But before we get to that, and one of the listeners pointed out a couple days ago that when I say hello to people that have checked in, it sounds like if you are from the Chicago area and were a kid back in the 50s and 60s, there was a program called Romper Room. Now, I don't know if it was a syndicated program, but it was in Chicago. And this woman would look through a mirror that had no mirror. And she would see people through the TV screen and call out names at random. And I'd like to do that right now in the streaming schnauzer window. Zachary and Doug and Sandy and Matt. And I had a text I saw from Lisa, and her dog, Harvey, is blowing me a kiss as I speak. Thank you, Harvey. Appreciate it. And everybody else checking in right now. We keep an eye on those texts. If you'd like to talk live on the program, that's possible too. Just text 773-888-2157. And then Keith, my other producer, will pick that up and he'll set you up to talk live on the program. All right, let's say hello to Leslie.
Hey, I'm doing that Arthur Fleck thing.
Okay, all right.
Hey.
For those of you who didn't hear that show, if you've seen the movie Joker, Joaquin Phoenix as Fleck. He is anxious to go on this talk show hosted by Robert De Niro, and he finally gets the call to get on the show, although they're going to mock him, and that doesn't end well for De Niro's character. Anyway, he's watching the program over and over again to get a feel of how to be a guest, and he did that thing that a lot of guests do on actual talk shows. When the guest comes from around the corner out of the curtain, they look at the host, they lean back, and they point.
And they do the finger.
I mean, really, there's nothing that really makes sense. It just, I'm here. Hey, you. And that's what she was doing. All right. What are you drinking, Leslie?
I'm drinking a Coppola Cabernet Sauvignon.
All right. Ooh, that looks
Cheers,
nice.
y'all.
Yeah, and I got a Manhattan. Well, not much left. Oh, my God. I got a pace.
Oopsie.
I got the pace. Well,
It's your birthday week. You get to go nuts.
Yeah, that's the excuse I'm using. It's a birthday week in a pandemic. And they released, McDonald's is listening to this program. They re-released the McRib on my birthday. And I said, that's odd. It has to be because of my birthday, because why would you release something on a Wednesday on the second day of the month?
There you go.
It's an homage. Thank you, McDonald's. Appreciate it. And that's what I want to see under the tree. December 25th, Jesus' birthday, a bag of McRibs, flamethrower. What else?
The McRib. Lottery tickets.
Fire log, KFC fire logs.
Oh,
There you go. Sure, Gwyneth Paltrow's candle, whatever that whole menagerie would be.
Oh, there you go.
Compliment.
And the Entenmann's raspberry cheesecake.
Entenmann's raspberry coffee cake. I was hoping that would be the vaccine for COVID. So far, nothing on that angle. But I was praying that God would, at the end of the year, throw us a bone. Please, God. I pray to the moon or whatever I have to pray to. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you follow. Tom Skilling is the ace weatherman in Chicago and a good friend of mine. And I was looking at his Facebook page, and he put a picture of this Chinese flag that is now on the moon. This is the second flag to be put on the moon. Ours was the first.
Yep.
And I replied to that picture. I said, okay, so we put men on the moon 51 years ago. These guys put a flag. It was all robotic. There were no humans from them on the moon. They planted the flag robotically. And I'm supposed to be impressed by a country that makes all my Christmas ornaments.
They do make nice firecrackers, though.
And firecrackers. But we were there 51 years ago. Sorry, guys. A little late to the party. Also, I was watching for the first time this season White Christmas. We watched it last night. And I got to say, because I think of everything that's happened this year, when it was into that military part at the front of the movie, when Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby are at war.
Entertaining the troops, yeah.
World War II. I got really emotional. It was one of those things where I didn't think it was going to happen. And I'm watching that and I'm thinking about my father and World War II. And man, that hit me harder than it's ever hit me before. And then we get into the tiny waists. Is it possible? I noticed this. Vera Ellen's waist got smaller as the movie went on, if that's possible. Everybody in that movie had a tambourine as a belt.
Well, and in the one dance number where she has the tambourine, it's the minstrel show thing. She comes out of a section of the stage, and you look at her legs, and it's got anorexia written all over it. I mean, those legs are painful. And in how thin they are.
Yes, and the sad part was there was not enough leg to write anorexia all over it.
You could not.
And
oh man,
and she had a belt on that looked like a tambourine at one point. That's why I saw that and thought, everybody here has the tambourine as a belt. That's how skinny all these people are.
Oh yeah, like Danny Kaye. Really, he's got a 45 for a waist.
Yeah, and he was probably considered chunky back then. Anyway, we watched that and I got really warm and fuzzy, and it's one of those deals where everything now is magnified because of this year. Everything is, wow, I never really appreciated that as much as I do now, kind of thing.
You know, I just saw Meghan Trainor's new Christmas release. It ain't no white Christmas. Maybe it's because I need those touchstone moments. But Meghan Trainor with all these stickies on her face, and stop. Don't even.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of conflict this year with racial tension and everything. Okay, it's a white Christmas. It means nothing about race. It's just snow is white. And that's what we're talking about here. Please, just let us have this holiday. We need something here to get to the end of the year. Just let us all get along for a few more weeks. We just have to stand down because the whole year has been beating the hell out of us. It's a dumpster tire fire of a year. And that's why I know I'm acknowledging a sad thing that happened 40 years ago. I can't believe it was 40 years ago that Lennon was shot already. I can remember that day like it was a month ago. And I thought, well, I'd like to talk about something pleasant that came out of that, which was their music. And I am, as I said, talking to two guys that have really done a magnificent job of touring the world and playing that music. So we'll get to that in just a second here. What else do I have right now?
And Gary, I'd point out, if you didn't notice, that I littered the opening today with more than 25 different Beatles song titles.
Oh, okay.
You know, he gives us little trinkets that we can look for when we watch the show again. And we recommend that you do watch it again.
Okay. He has Zaprudered the opening of this program. You have to Zapruder it. Get all the little details out of it.
Oh, and it's just in the audio, right? It's just where the folks who will re-listen on audio podcast, or if you watch it here on video. But starting with the horn sound going through the end of When I Talk, there are more than 25 different Beatles titles in there today.
Okay, very nice. Very nice. All right, let me introduce my first guest. And you might remember him from the Paul Schaefer Band. He was with Paul Schaefer and the house band that played for the entire Letterman run. And he's also a member of the band Fab Faux, and they tour the world doing beautiful replications of the Beatles songs. And he's been, it looks like, on every Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony on stage. He's played with everybody. And we are going to chat about his immersion in the Lennon-McCartney canon. And then I'm going to talk with my good friend, Jay Goepner. And let's talk to Will first. This was recorded because Will is in Europe and the time didn't match up, so we recorded this. Will, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Gary.
The last time you were on the, I'm happy to have you here because we're going to talk about a number of things. The last time you were on the program was right after that terrorist massacre at the concert hall in Paris. And the Fab Faux was coming through Chicago about a day later, I believe. And I go to see you guys and I am sitting there and I had that same feeling I had when I watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in February of 1964 of, I need a cleanse. I need somebody to make me feel better, that life isn't all chaotic. We were just a few months from the JFK assassination. And for a kid to have the Beatles come along and scrub at least a lot of that angst away was just something I needed. And then as I'm sitting watching the Fab Faux, a day after the massacre in Paris, I had that same feeling. Thank God these guys are on stage making me feel better. And here we are in the pandemic. When will you guys be back on stage so I can feel better?
That's a good question. When we're all feeling better, we'll be doing it as one human race, I think.
When was the last time the Fab Faux performed on stage?
I believe that I think it was, oh, you know what? It was kind of right. It was the beginning of March. We were down in Florida, I believe.
And you had the whole year booked, and then pandemic hits, and that's it. The year's wiped out.
I had the whole year booked with Fab Faux and with, festivals in Japan and all kinds of stuff. And everything just kind of fell like dominoes. It was just like, okay, I can see that this is going to be a big break, break in reaction.
When is your next scheduled appearance, or have you just let that go until we can get more daylight here?
It's funny because even though you think you have a scheduled appearance, as soon as you have committed to it and it's locked into the calendar, it moves. So this is still an arbitrary, no matter what I say, it doesn't really mean anything at this point.
Let's talk about the room you're sitting in via green screen. That is the Abbey Road studio where all the magic was made, right?
Studio 2, yep, there it is. There's the stairway going up to the, oops, wait a minute. How do I point this thing?
There it is.
That's the stairway going up to the control room over there. If I could get out of its way. Yep. And the window you see looking down into the studio.
And that's where George Martin sat.
And that's probably the piano back there over my shoulder. The black rectangle, which is probably the piano played on, out of college, money spent, and things like that. The tack piano, I believe.
You guys, the Fab Faux, have recorded in that studio. Is there a vibe? Do you feel the vibe from 50 years ago?
Yes, I mean you can't help but imagine like all the things that happen in that room when you're in that room, and even as powerful as that is, it gets more crazy when you put the headphones on, and you can hear your signal going through that very echo chamber that the Beatles used for a lot of their stuff. It's just eerie. It's so specific, the feeling.
And then you guys walk out and do a picture on the crosswalk.
You have to do that.
You have to do that.
Because we're nerds, and of course.
But it's still electric, no pun intended, or acoustic. 50 years later, it still has that vibration. That's how magnificent these guys were. You performed on stage with 3 out of the 4, but you were also connected to John Lennon in a way. Let's talk about that first. You recorded something with Ringo, with John Lennon's track.
Yeah, the thing was that, thanks to technology, I have played with John Lennon, I can say that. So the Ringo album was called Rotogravure, and it had a song on there by John called Cooking in the Kitchen of Love. Cooking in the Kitchen of Love, Ringo singing, of course. And by the time I got to the studio to replace whatever bass needed to be put on there, John had already played his piano part. So technically we've played together.
What's it like to get that close to one of them? Here you are paying homage to their music in the most magnificent way that I've seen. You and Jay Goepner, and Jay will be coming up in a few minutes. What's it like to talk and be next to them? And what is that conversation?
In a kind of very layman way, which anybody will tell you that the Beatles are on another level from any other musician that I've played with, like everybody, but the Beatles, it's another story. And the feeling at first is sort of tunnel vision. You try to be cool and you want to be like a person and you don't want to lose it. You want to try to like be as comfortable as possible and not make those guys uncomfortable. But the bottom line is these guys are middle class, come from middle class. They're people. To us, they're icons. To us, they're at the top of the food chain kind of thing. But, at heart, they're just guys. They're just kids that grew up in a not a very wonderful environment with not a lot of resources at hand and had to basically invent their lives and did a pretty good job of it.
When I think about how they ascended, and if one thing is not there, one of the pieces is not in that whole fabric, it might be where they're still playing in small clubs, or does another Brian Epstein come along? Brian Epstein goes to see them perform at the Cavern on his lunch break, and that's where the whole thing goes supernova. Is there a thought on your plate of, if he doesn't go see them, if things go a different direction, as talented as they were, is there a possibility we never see them beyond the shores of England? Does that ever compute in your head, or you think they were so incredible, somebody would have discovered them? But you don't know. When I see piano players in shopping malls that are very good, I think, wow, you're playing at a shopping mall, you're a great pianist. But that's the way it goes.
Right. Well, all the people watching the Beatles were thinking the same thing, except that Brian sort of had stars in his eyes, I'm sure, as of, as another resourceful Liverpudlian that he was, So he thought, I love what I love about these guys, and I dislike what I think is going to take them to the next level. So I'm going to ask them if they would change a few things about their appearance, about the way they present themselves on stage. Stop with the cigarettes and the booze on stage and the cussing and the greasy hair and the whatever and the leather jackets, and put them in suits. He must have had pretty persuasive ways, because these guys were already in a direction, and they were sort of on a roll with being themselves, and it took a lot of trust to get them to make a move that was suggested by an outside person. I mean, who was this guy to say change this or change anything? And they had to really be talked into investing in his decisions, and it's a really good thing that they did. Maybe deep inside they knew they needed to take it to the next level, and didn't really. Maybe they felt stuck at that time.
Well, there's another component too, and I think this way, and I'm fascinated by how A, B, and C have to connect. Ed Sullivan was somewhere, he was at an airport and saw this fuss because these guys were getting off the plane, and he didn't know what it was. He inquired, and that's why he booked them on his show. Again, if he's not there, does it still happen? And I will put this on top of that. I saw Elton John on with Stephen Colbert, and he talked about how he met Bernie Taupin. It was complete kismet. He went to some song production house. Elton does not do lyrics, and he's trying to sell his music to this guy. The guy said, well, here are a bunch of people that have sent me resumes. Grab one, or he grabbed one and handed it to Elton, and it turned out to be Bernie Taupin. That seems pretty random, and look at what that came to be. Do you believe in that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how that clicked the way it did, but I feel like any of these people we're talking about, whether it's the Beatles or Elton, because of what they had energy-wise that was propelling them towards something greater than their daily home lives, where mom was giving them a bowl of cereal in the morning and saying, "Go out and do something, practical." They all had a real bent to do what they were doing, and I think a lot of that was to get out of their current situation, and because they were impressionable kids, they latched onto something that they really loved doing, and because they loved it so much, they got really good at it. And I feel like eventually, if it wasn't going to be Brian Epstein that came along, it was going to be someone, and they were lucky that it was Brian, because he was not there to rip them off in the way like a later manager might have done.
And all of their music was constructed in 7 years. I think we take that for granted, in that an artist today will put out an album maybe once every 3 or 4 years. All of the Beatles stuff happened in a 7-year span, and all before they were 30. That in the equation is mind-blowing too.
So prolific. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that because of their upbringing, because of where they came from up in the north of England, where it's kind of it's not the happiest place in the world, and to really get through the day, you find yourself being really competitive with the person next to you. You're one-upping the whole time. You're trying to out-clever the person, and I think all those kind of chops, if you will, get you into a momentum that keeps you going and going and going and trying to be better.
I think watching the Fab Faux, as I said, that's all we're going to get as far as seeing Beatles music performed the way you guys do it. Even Paul McCartney doesn't tour with a string section or a horn section. You guys have the strings and the horns and everything. Everything is replicated so beautifully. And I'm going to point out a song, and I'm going to ask you in a minute here what songs out of their canon you thoroughly enjoy playing on stage. One that mesmerized the hell out of me was when you guys were doing the Sgt. Pepper album in its entirety, and you come to the George Harrison song, Within You, Without You. and your guitarist Jimmy Vivano plays.
Vivino, yeah.
I'm sorry, Jimmy Vivino plays the sitar on that song. And the sitar, when I was a kid and it was on the album, I thought, well, it's witchy, it's Sgt. Pepper's, so I'll just like it because they like it. But I didn't really appreciate the sitar until I heard you guys do that song in concert. And it is a trance I was in, listening to all the vibrations coming out of that song. George was into something that I didn't really understand until many years later. I get now what he found in the midst of all that music and those instruments.
It was amazing. Again, it's a kid's fascination with something that they get into, and it moves them, and they stay with it, and they develop it. And I think without George Harrison, we may not even know what the word sitar means.
Again, where point A, B, and C connect, otherwise A stays in the basement. And I know some people are looking at this thinking, no, it happens anyway. It's it's not true. I'm sure you know a lot of very talented people that never got above a certain stage. It just didn't line up properly.
Yeah, I think you have to be hungry to get there. And those guys were massively hungry. And,
Exactly.
you know, about George and Indian music, you know, I guess the first sign of a sitar most of us heard was probably Norwegian wood, for example, you know.
Right.
That was one of the early exposures to Westerners that the sitar got. And I think that, you know, because George stuck with his guns and he meant business with that stuff, he kept writing more songs that had it, and he kept promoting the Indian musicians that turned him onto it in the first place. Ravi Shankar stuff, he put him in the concert for Bangladesh. And because of that, you got to hear them really do their thing, which is like a one chord piece of music, like a raga is what I'm talking about. A raga, where a thing based on one tonality, kind of, because it's one tonality, it kind of sucks you into almost a hypnotic place where, you know, you're not thinking about the form of the song or anything else. You're just listening to it develop it, and they just go and go and go. And it can be mesmerizing. So I really got into the raga thing after because of George, like every other Western person that I know.
Do you feel that when you're performing within you without you on stage that I felt in the audience? Does it come through you on stage like that?
I feel nervous. Can we pull this off?
You do.
I can't wait to get to the end of this song.
Seriously.
It's really difficult. Well, you know, there's a section of it that's in 5/8, and it's really got to be sonically right, you know, that we have to hear each other really well, as if we are sitting in a circle, and we're not. We're on in-ear monitors. Everything's electronic, going through mics, and this is the music that was invented with people sitting around on a rug, basically, really close to each other. So you have to replicate that electronically. You know, we have a real violinist playing cues that are letting us know what the next thing we're supposed to play and sing is, you know. And so all that's got to be just really well set up. Part of our really long sound checks that we have before we play, a lot of it, when we're doing a Sgt. Pepper show, a lot of the time is devoted to that song.
Well, it pays off, because as an audience member, I was moved like I never thought I would be by the sitar and just the whole aura of the song coming across the audience. I don't think it was just me. I just felt it on a level that I never expected. Another song that does that to me when you guys perform it, Tomorrow Never Knows.
Ah, that's a good one.
How do you feel when you're performing that? You got the megaphone up there to do that one part. You're doing that part, and that's another one. Blew me away.
That's another one chord wonder. You know, another one of those hypnotic things that just the groove starts and it stays the same throughout the whole song. And yeah, it was really fun, sort of assembling that song. In fact, because that song was really the first of its kind, it was, you know, they used all these tape loops and things that Paul McCartney had invented in his house and brought in, all these wild, fast motion sounds and things that you didn't know what it was. When I speak, we were talking about tunnel vision, meeting the Beatles and stuff earlier on. There's a scene where I'm telling Paul, there's a movie that was done when we did the concert for New York. It's called The Love We Make. And there's a scene where I'm first talking to Paul and I've got the tunnel vision thing going. And I'm just like he's trying to engage in conversation and I'm trying to wonder what the hell I'm talking about. And the first thing I thought of doing was confessing to him that we have a Beatles band, the Fab Faux, and that we do the music that was thought of as being impossible to perform on stage. And the first thing he said was, "Do you do Tomorrow Never Knows?" And I said, "Of course." Because that was kind of his baby. He made all those sound effects.
He did all the sounds. It was John's song, but he did all the background stuff. Wow. Okay. Right. Yeah, because in their day they couldn't do those things on stage. They didn't have the technology. So it's up to you guys. And
there's a certain amount of guilt that goes with that,
Well, that's cool that he said that. And well, do you do Tomorrow Never Knows? He's my grandfather. It's hard to believe.
It's kind of a guilt. It's a guilty pleasure knowing that they couldn't have done it.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. This is the only way we can see this music performed. There are two dead, and Paul does what he does. Ringo, I don't know if he ever really gets deep into any Beatles catalog. He does his stuff and maybe a couple others. The Yellow Submarine, of course, that he sung. It's hard to believe that next week it's 40 years since Lennon's death. You were where when you heard?
I was walking out of a studio called Media Sound in New York, probably out of a Barry Manilow session or something. And the receptionist was crying. And I said, "What's going on? Are you okay?" She said, she told me the news, and I sat down with her and we both cried. And it was, you don't forget where you were at that moment.
How far was that from the Dakota where he was shot?
Well, I think the Dakota was in the 70s.
Yes, 72nd and Central Park West.
So I was on 57th and like 8th Avenue.
So you were there when all this is erupting. Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What's that conversation like? Because you're a guy that has been immersed in this music for, at that point, probably 10 solid years, at least 15, because you got inspired by watching them on Ed Sullivan.
Totally kicked my career into gear when I saw them. So yes, I had been 11 years old, and by this time I was in my 20s, at least, maybe even 30s. I can't remember. But you do the math. I'm sure I went home and turned on the news and every newscast I could find to try to get some answers.
And then George has been dead almost 20 years.
Wow.
How old are we, as they say? Okay, so you're now forming the Fab Faux when? When does the Fab Faux come out? When do you guys come together?
That happened after I met Rich Pagano, our drummer, and that was in 1998. In the spring is when we actually did our first gig. So I thought of this basically around a New Year's Eve of that year, of the beginning of 1998. And I knew it had to be more than 4 guys. I knew it had to be at least 5 guys to get all those textures onto the stage. Those great, keyboard parts, doubled harmonies, percussion parts that happen on the records that make them so magical.
And I know when you are performing with Paul Schaefer's band, Paul McCartney was on Letterman's show, I believe it was only once, and performed. I went to see the Letterman show about a month before he left the show, and I found myself unable to do anything but stare at the spot on the stage where the Beatles performed at the Ed Sullivan Theater there. That had to be cool for you every night to come out knowing that's where it all started. That was the ignition right there.
It was like a holy cathedral for me.
And who did you play with all those years? And I think it's somebody that we might not expect that you thought was fabulous. James Brown. Is that true of all the people you performed with in sessions or whatever? James Brown Comes to the Top, right?
That's the ultimate. That was the
Really?
ultimate. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It never got any better. And the funny thing is, that was at the very first year of the 33 and a third year run of the Letterman show. So we were back at NBC in 1982, and James came on as a guest, and he only brought 2 horn players and entrusted our rhythm section to be his band, except for the horns. And we were just in heaven, and it was unbelievable to play with that guy.
I don't think I ever got the final answer when I asked you, because we moved on to something else as far as what songs you like playing on stage. Beatles songs. Strawberry Fields is another one that you guys do that is, woo, that's a bingo. And I know now you're saying some of these songs get a little complicated and you don't want to screw them up and you're just waiting for it to be over. But what are you in the groove with where you're just up there and it's feeling pretty good?
Well, I love doing Walrus. That's a really good one.
You did that on the Letterman show. The Fab Faux performed that on Letterman, right?
We did a version of it, yeah.
Yep.
You know, it's funny that we have the luxury of horns and strings and all that stuff, but the really difficult ones to do are the early rockers, because you don't have all the bells and whistles to sort of compensate for all your shortcomings as a non-Beatle. And the early rockers are the ones where they just had to bring it all, you know, from 4 guys doing it.
Right, 3 guitars and a drum, and that was it, stripped down.
Yeah, and plus, you know, I'm 68 and they were teenagers, so it's a little bit of a challenge to pull it off. You know, I'm glad I'm not dressing up like those guys.
Right, you see these groups go out, they've got the Nehru jackets and the wigs and all that, and I don't know, I think that is a little much of a smokescreen, because they're not doing as intricately as you are on stage the music.
Well, you know, there's different ways to view what the Beatles were, and one of them was they're kind of fun cartoon characters, and another way is that they were as serious a musician as is Mozart, you know, and that's kind of our approach.
Well, if you look at all the solo albums from those guys and cherry-picked songs off of each one of them, how many of those would have made it onto a Beatles album? How many more Beatles albums would we have had if you did what was put out between 70 and 80?
I think probably the most Beatle-y stuff was the early stuff that they were writing while they were still Beatles. And at one point, Fab Faux did a sort of a show that was based on what would the next Beatle album contain, and we did songs that we thought would end up on the next Beatle album, because they were written when they were written during the Beatles and finally recorded as solo songs. So some of those were like, you know, maybe a song or two from McCartney's first solo album, and a thing or two from George's, and a thing or two from John's.
My Sweet Lord, stuff like that.
God, I can't remember I don't think that would have been one of them.
Oh,
because it was too specifically George, you know, and almost religious, you know, in nature. So I don't know if the Beatles would have gone there, because it was Brian Epstein that told the Beatles never discuss religion or politics.
Really?
Yeah. So I think they probably stuck with his advice as long as they could, even though John got into, you know, he got a little political with revolution and things like that, and some of his, you know, off the cuff, outside the band statements that got those guys in trouble.
Well, you look at the moment when Brian died and what happened right after. That's when they did the Magical Mystery Tour movie, and that was a disaster. They did need him as a rudder. I don't know if we can overamp how much he meant to that group, because when they were regrouping after him, trying to find their sea legs, it was a different equation, and they knew it.
Yeah, they were like a free-floating entity without a lot of oversight.
Direction and management. Yeah. That's how the Apple store opened, and they were just giving money to anybody to do stuff. That was where you found what the real strength of Brian Epstein was.
Yeah, what would he have said about that? Guys, excuse me a second.
Yeah. We're not doing that. We don't do retail. We don't do religion, right. Politics.
We're a band, baby. We're a band.
We don't do retail. Wow. Well, Will, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and continued success. I know you're working on solo stuff, and you're a very sought after session musician, and you're always busy. I would assume a little less during the pandemic, but you're traveling around Europe doing things right now, right?
I'm quite busy, doing a few things of my own, but also working on a lot of other people's stuff, and trying to stay healthy. That's the thing that we all should be focusing on the most.
Well, thank you, and I hope you have a great holiday.
You too, Gary. Always a pleasure, man.
Will Lee from Europe. Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. I want to bring on my friend Jay Goepner now to add into that conversation.
Hey.
And Jay, hey.
Right. Yeah, there we are.
All right. Okay. Hey, I know I said earlier I've been rather melancholy lately, and I got melancholy again thinking about you being on the show, because this would be the time of the year where I would do my Christmas radio show from the 95th floor of the John Hancock building in Chicago, and you and your friend Phil Angotti, as the Beatles brothers, would provide the entertainment. And we get about 50 listeners up there, open bars, sandwiches, and sculptor Dave Novotny would bring a bunch of stuff and give it away, and it was just great. And of course, that was a great time, and you were part of that. And of course, radio became allergic to fun, and that is the end of that. You also have performed with Phil over the years, doing these Beatles songs, and we had on one of those shows Donny Osmond. Donny Osmond came up. He was in town doing a Christmas show with his sister. They came up, and I'll tell you what, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I know you talked to him for a while and did some music with him there. Great guy.
Sweet, beautiful stories too. I love this story with Paul McCartney. That was so great. I don't know if you remember it, Gary, but he was saying one day he was in Los Angeles. Paul McCartney was touring there, and all of a sudden Donny Osmond gets a knock on his door, and it's Paul McCartney saying, "Hey, my daughters are big fans of yours. Can I have your autograph?" So, I mean,
yeah, that's what I was saying to Will. When worlds collide, when Paul McCartney wants your autograph. Okay, that's pretty great. Let me start with this, Phil. I'm sorry, Jay.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Phil's the other Beatle brother.
Doing good,
how is Phil doing, by the way? I haven't talked about.
Yeah, I talked to him not too long ago, but I think he's got a new a pandemic album coming out, so I'm excited to hear about that. So, but, he's doing okay, and we still do occasionally play as the Beatle brothers, and then I got my backdated band, Class 68 band, 2J Way band, Jay Goepner band. I got like 5 different acts, plus the international touring with the John Lennon tribute. So
this is all for tax purposes. You have to have a lot of different bands to shelter
exactly. It's all hidden behind these pictures.
There you go. Let me start with this, Jay. You are a member of the American Airlines workforce and have been for many years.
32 years, you work 32 years.
How many?
32.
32.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And you work at one of the busiest airports on the planet, O'Hare in Chicago. What has the last 9 months been like working at an airport of that size? Pretty quiet?
Yeah. Well, since the pandemic hit, about February, March, it started, slowing down. And then, of course, they cut all the flight schedule and laid off a bunch of people. And it's the airport is looking like a ghost town these days. But we just had the holiday with Thanksgiving travel, and it was up a bit. So it's just like everything going on right now. It's different every day.
And you've been able to keep your job. Is it because of seniority?
Yeah,
good.
32 years, and my wife British got 36 years, so she also works for American. And so we've been able to both stay afloat, as they'd say. Very fortunate, and very, very thankful. And we love American Airlines, and the fact that was what brought us together. And also we have so many people that we've shared time with there, and yeah, it's a great airlines, but the whole industry is nobody knows what's going to happen next. So
yeah, well, again, we're all in this giant airplane and boat together. I love the stories you share with me over the years as far as Beatles lore or whatever. One of my favorites is when the Beatles catalog became available for the first time since it was sold off in the 60s. And you seem to have gotten all the details from somebody that seems legit. And let's talk about that for just a second. The catalog became available about 40 years ago, right?
Yeah, it did. And it was funny because, you know, when Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney were doing their Say, 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 and The Girl Is Mine, and you know, Michael Jackson was coming into London, and Paul spending time at Paul McCartney's house watching Disney cartoons. Paul, of course, Michael asked him, hey, Paul, what do you do with your money? And of course, Paul goes, I'm into music publishing. I know music. I own this. I own Oh Wisconsin and White Christmas and all these songs. So Michael kind of said, oh, that's great. He goes, I'm going to own your songs one day. And Paul goes, okay, Michael, good luck with that. I've been trying for years to own my own music. So, well, one day, Northern Songs went on sale. They called Paul McCartney and said, hey, we're putting the Beatles catalog up. We want $10 million. And so Paul says, great, I'll call Yoko. Maybe we'll go $5 million each, because he wrote half of those songs with John, you know, never thinking, you know, but when he called Yoko said, oh, I know someone there at Northern, maybe we could get it for $8 million. And you know, while they're, you know, fiddling around with $8 million, Michael Jackson throws $50 million on the table. And I think Northern Songs called Paul, and nothing came out of his mouth. You know, he just stood there when he, you know, said, hey, there's $50 million on the table, you know.
And of course, he got it. He got the catalog. And even with the Beatles catalog, he seemed to have money problems, which is amazing, which means his music company owned the catalog because he owed them money, and on and on. But that's pretty interesting. Think about the Beatles catalog was available for $10 million. You could make all that back in a day selling songs to commercials or whatever if you wanted to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's worth, I think it's worth $1 billion now, at least.
Just the music that was recorded, and you were talking with Will, just 7 years, and just incredible, all that stuff that was in there. So you go around the world and do Beatles music and Lennon music. Yes. And you obviously haven't been able to do that over the last 9 months. So what's your, you don't know, nobody knows, as Will said, we don't know, but you didn't play after March. Did you play anything this year? You know what? I was very fortunate. This year we just started this a new duo, which was a piano duo, and it was all classic rock. It's called 2J Way, because my partner, his name is Jay Martini, so we were both named Jay. So we're doing Beatles, we're doing Elton John songs, we're doing solo, we're doing ELO or Bee Gees, all that great classic rock stuff, but it's just piano and vocals. So because a lot of outdoor places couldn't have bands, you know, because it was so big, the duo fit in just fine. So very fortunate this year that I actually got to play out and do some shows this summer. So I was very thankful for that. So
you have some kind of employment.
And the band.
Yeah, you have some kind of employment good luck charm on you.
Oh yeah, Hey, I go to church every Sunday. I thank God every day. So I'm very blessed and very fortunate. I got a you know, just great luck, and you know, I'm so thankful though, Gary, especially. And I want to thank you too for this, and I want to thank you for that interview with Will Lee. That was great. It was so cool seeing Will again. I mean, I think it was in last November, I was in Los Angeles and I got to see him and his band. He was in a jazz band playing a club in Los Angeles. And we got to spend, you know, a good time together during that LA stay. And just incredible guy, and like you said, he's got stories, and very humble guy too. I mean, he actually toured with George Harrison in 1992 and played in London and all these great places. And he's so cool. So thank you.
Yeah, well, both of you guys have been real great friends, and I appreciate that. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I wanted to touch base with you over the holidays here because I was remembering those days when you and Phil would come on the show and play, and I thank you for that. And I hope you have a great holiday. I keep calling you Phil because I haven't seen Jay. I'm sorry, Jay.
That's right.
Again, thank you for your friendship.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much, and happy birthday! 2 days late. But,
well, they come and they go very quickly. As they say, after 50, it's like you're having breakfast every 15 minutes. Yeah.
Well, you look great, Gary. You look great.
This is all a snap-on. This goes back on the styrofoam head in about 3 hours.
Oh, is that what it is? Just snaps on?
There you go. Thanks, Jay.
Take care. Peace, everybody.
Okay. All right, Leslie, how are you? You still there?
Yeah, I'm actually, I didn't mention it earlier in the show, but I've got this kazoo and mouth harp group that I'm putting together for the holidays. Yeah, we're going to be doing a couple of gigs, outdoors, and we'll try and keep you apprised of everything going on with that.
Wow.
God, these guys are so talented. I feel like such a schmuck.
Well, I know. That's why I will go after the show. What am I going to do after the show, Leslie?
If it's like all the previous weeks, you will head out to the backyard, sit on the big rock, take off your shoes, and cry.
Yeah, it's cleansing. I like doing that.
It's what you do.
Okay, let me acknowledge the fine sponsors. First of all, let's hear from Bettenhausen Automotive in Tinley Park and Orland Park, Illinois. It's a rap thing. I'm pretty
Bettenhausen. Hey, Bettenhausen. Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. Bettenhausen, 159th Street, Bettenhausen.
And if you need a refi or a mortgage, call David Hochberg and his team. I just heard from Karen in Nebraska. She got a refi through David, and it was a very pleasant experience. He has helped many of my listeners over the years, and he can probably help you. Call those numbers on the screen for a free consultation. And next month, David told me, is huge for bankruptcies and divorces, unfortunately. But you have to have your credit in order if you're going into that storm, and he can help you out with that too. David Hochberg, he's a great guy. All right, Leslie, you got a couple stories that we can talk about?
A politician named Adolf Hitler just won a decisive election victory in Namibia. Adolf Hitler Uunona received 85% of the vote for a seat on the regional council in the former German colony of Oshana. Adolf explains that the name was given to him by his father. He says, quote, he probably didn't understand what Adolf Hitler stood for. As a child, I saw it as a totally normal name. He said it wasn't until he was a teen that he learned the real history of his namesake. And with that in mind, he's assuring his constituents that he has no interest in world nation.
And he has decided, even at this point, to keep the name.
Wouldn't you just go AH? Call me.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you a little slack that you didn't know early on. But when you found out, wouldn't you go, holy shit, I got to change this name?
Especially when your last name is Uunona. You might find another name to go with that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, organizers of South Africa's Powerball lottery have launched an investigation after an unusual sequence of numbers came up during a recent drawing. People started demanding answers when the first 5 numbers drawn were 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. But that's what happened. And then to top it off, the winning Powerball number just happened to be 10. So now we're at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 20 people bought tickets with that combination, netting them around $370,000 each. 79 others picked the first 5 numbers correctly, but missed on the Powerball multiplier. But there's a good chance that there was no hanky-panky. They say the odds of these numbers coming up are actually the same as any other combination.
Seriously.
Isn't that the weirdest thing? Well, it's like they say if you buy 1 ticket or 20 tickets, your chances of winning haven't changed at all.
And I believe that as much as I believe you don't know who the hell Adolf Hitler is. if you were born in the last 40 or 50 years. Okay. Yeah, I'm buying.
And that's why we come to you, Garry, because your cynicism or your skepticism, let's say, is what we need. Okay. And finally, a woman in Australia is recovering from a brutal kangaroo attack that she's blaming on Sarah Jessica Parker Cologne. Tracy Noonan says she sees roos all the time while she's out jogging, but what happened last weekend was an encounter she'll never forget. One kangaroo in particular began edging closer. Then it charged, bounding over several fences before crashing into her and knocking her to the ground. She says it took her throwing a handful of rocks at the animal before she was finally able to get away. A local ranger explained that the smell of her cologne, which happened to be Sarah Jessica Parker Cologne, was likely what enticed this kangaroo. She indicates that she'll be sticking with unscented deodorant from now on.
Well, that's a great marketing tool. If you'd like to attract a kangaroo as your partner, buy this perfume.
Or Matthew Broderick. Yeah, you get one or the other.
There you go. All right. Well, that's it for this week. And it is time for some complimentary cannoli that is coming down the aisle. Please take that. There it is. Beautiful. Beautiful. And what about the schnauzer? My friend Roberto said because it's cold out, you should put a dickie on your schnauzer. What do you suggest?
You should always put a dickie on your schnauzer. Well, in honor of our guests, Jay and Will, and their instruments, I suggest you finger the schnauzer.
Oh, woo! There she is. There's that schnauzer. Yeah, thank you. All right. We have got our work cut out for us this weekend. Have a great weekend. Back on Monday. It is time to drop those wheels. 3 in the green, gears down, flaps are down. The voice of the globe, the Garrforce, has landed.
If you like that, I got other stuff I think you're going to like. This is the Garrforce